Good day, pleasant good day. I am your edgy English teacher, and I've been teaching for 23 years. It's a long time. I love my job, and English is my business. Reading, writing, speaking, thinking. So, as a teacher, I wanted to talk today about the power of reading and books and how reading saved my life. How reading saved my life. So as a teacher, most of my students don't like reading. And I always try to encourage them that reading is important. We're in the age of the internet, the quick videos, the TikTok, that seemingly gives us information. But I would say that information is on a surface level. And the only way you're gonna get real or depth is by reading. There's no other way around it. It builds character, it builds discipline, it builds patience and focus. So reading is fundamental. A quote from Proverbs 4:7, "Wisdom is the principal thing, therefore get wisdom, and with all thy getting, get understanding." So my story in terms of reading and how reading saved my life is essentially one of my father. Well, let me take you back, right? My father, back in the Caribbean, bought me or the family a set of encyclopedias. And I remember I was like 10 years old, and used to wet the bed. It's a bed weather, and I would get up 4 in the morning after wetting the bed. I would sit on the cold concrete floor of our living room house, and the moon would be shining through the curtains of the living room, and this little boy would sit on the concrete floor and read. I didn't know it then, but I was doing the best thing I could do for myself, which was gaining knowledge. So I remember reading the encyclopedias from A to Z, and learning about animals and America and bats and the human body, the whole plethora of knowledge that was available in the encyclopedias. What I didn't realize at the time was that I was educating myself, which is the principal thing about education, by the way. I always tell my students, the real education is the one you give yourself, not the one the teacher gives you. The teacher can only give you this much. But the real food for your mind, the real food for your soul comes from self-exploration, comes from sitting and getting the knowledge for yourself, right? It's almost like the analogy. Teach a man, or give a man a fish, he eats for a day. Teach a man to fish, and he can feed himself. So the knowledge is in books. The knowledge is not really in school. The knowledge is in you. Education actually means to bring out, not to put in. Most of us think we can go to school and somebody stuff information into you. No, Education is to bring out your natural brilliance, your natural education, your natural intuition, your natural super intelligence, right? So education is about bringing out your genius. So back to my story. As a boy growing up, there came a point where I realized that if I continued along this path of self-knowledge, self-acquisition of knowledge, that was the key. And there came a point where I was no longer learning to read, I was reading to learn. Let me repeat that. In the life of a young person, he realizes that he's no longer learning to read, he's reading to learn. And if he or she sticks with that, the possibilities are endless. So, having taken this path of self-discovery, my star, so to speak, took off. I was a voracious reader coming up in high school, as a teenager and as an adult. And I often tell my students, the power of reading is that I could walk in, not to be braggadocious, but the power of reading, there's so many benefits, right? Vocabulary, it informs your vocabulary. It informs the way you speak. It informs the way you write. It informs the way you think critically. And it's actually puts you a step above the ordinary, right? Most people don't read. I think as much as 50% of Americans, I live in America, don't read, right? Most of us don't read. I mean, that's just a fact, right? And so being a reader, it's like a cheat code, if you want to say so. It's like a special vitamin for your mind, right? It puts you one step ahead of the crowd, and who doesn't want that? So, reading is a principal thing, right? I think I emphasized that. So, as a teacher, I wanted to share with you some of the things you can do if you're a teacher or you are a parent and you want to get your students or your children to read, right? This is very, very critical, very, very critical, right? How do we get kids to read, right? So I'm just gonna throw some of the things out to you that I do as a parent as well as a educator. So this is in no special order. It's just like, hey, this is what I do, and it works. How do I know it works? Because I've seen it work. So I think number one, one of the most important things is that you need to surround your students with books. You need to be surrounded with books. Like I said, when I was growing up, my father bought a set of Encyclopedia Americana or Encyclopedia Britannica. They were in blue, leather-bound books. Each one probably weighed like quarter of a pound. I remember it very vividly, right? So we need to surround young people with books, right? Novels, nonfiction, poetry, dictionaries. They need to be immersed in an environment of books and words. So for me, I took my kids to the library. We would go to the bookstore, Barnes & Noble. We would buy books all the time. They were surrounded with books, books by the pound, according to one of my favorite authors, Sherman Alexie. He read books by the pound. He bought books by the pound. So having lots of books is one key thing. Another important thing is you must read with your students. You must read with your children and have discussions, right? So for me, I always read with my kids. I always read with my students, and I tell them, we have conversations. We have conversations about the conflict. We have conversations about the character. We make text-to-self connection, text-to-world connections, text-to-text connections, right? How does this book relate to your life, to the world, to other books you've read? So you have rich conversations, and from those conversations, you can start writing. Because once you have ideas, the next logical step or easy step is to write them down. All right, so reading, conversation, immersion with books are all helpful things that can improve, enhance, complement, supplement your reading life. And one more thing just occurred to me. Reading or reading life is a lifestyle, right? It's not something you do the last thing before you go to bed, right? Like I have friends or students who said, Mr. McQueen, I like reading. Mr. Edgy English teacher, I like reading, but I always fall asleep. Yeah, well, the question is, are you prioritizing reading, right? You can't expect to read, which requires a lot of focus and discipline of mind after you've done everything else, right? Reading should be a priority. It should be something you do. You set a certain amount of time in the morning or before you eat, because you don't want to eat and then go read. You'll fall asleep, right? It has to be prioritized. It's something you do every day or a certain time or a certain place. So prioritizing reading makes it possible, makes it doable. So to wrap up, reading should be a lifestyle. It should be a hobby. It should be a challenge. It should be a reward. It shouldn't be a punishment. So reading saved lives. It saved my life. I think I want to wrap up this story by talking how it saved my life, right? So having been a reader as a child, growing up reading encyclopedias, understanding that I'm reading to learn rather than learning to read. This fruit that I planted, or my parents planted, just grew and grew and grew. So that at the time when I needed to take exams to get into college, grad school, I had this wealth of knowledge, right? That I've been harnessing for years, right? I had this massive body of language and understanding that I could apply to college. And so college was a breeze. Many times our students go to school, but they're not prepared for school. They're not prepared for college. Why? Because they're not readers, right? They're not used to that stamina of reading 20 pages, 100 pages, reading a book in 2 days. And that requires discipline and stamina. Reading is the key. So, there's a quote by one of my favorite authors. I want to leave you with this quote. Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain. I want to get that quote. He's such a great author. He wrote many great books. One of his quotes was, "The man who does not read has no advantage over the man who cannot read. The man that does not read has no advantage over the man who cannot read." So, what does that mean? Well, you tell me. maybe you could leave a note in the, whatever you call it, email or whatever, explaining what that means. So, I hope this was helpful. Enjoy your day. Read more, read more, read more. I'm your edgy English teacher. Peace.